I used to get food from the
Okay, hold on, chill. Dang. This is 22 True Horror Stories animated by SSG Animations.
McDonald's restaurant close to my house every day. A couple of months ago, I walked in to get something and was attended by a new female employee named Mary.
Look at the nose.
She was middle-aged, had short brown hair, and was slightly overweight.
Like a freaking elephant, bro.
While I waited for my order, she tried to get to know me, making small talk. I didn't mind at the time. She seemed nice, and there was nothing odd about our conversation. After giving me my sandwich,
I
left, not knowing that visiting McDonald's that day would lead to my biggest mistake ever. The next few days after meeting her weren't that different from the first. But as more days went by, I began to notice something strange about Mary. For starters, Mary was always the one taking my orders. This was unusual for McDonald's. To make things worse, the conversations she tried to have with me only became weirder and left me uncomfortable in most situations.
All right, Navy, have a good night.
She would say strange things like how I looked so sexy and tasty, and sometimes ask me questions that no employee should have been interested in. Everything about Mary's behavior was odd. She looked almost 10 years older than me and didn't strike me as that sort of person in any way. Eventually, I began visiting another McDonald's far away from my house, deciding against reporting Mary and getting her fired. A couple of weeks went by, and one day, I walked into the new McDonald's and saw Mary working at the counter.
What?
I was shocked and expected her to tell me if she was filling in for someone, but instead, Mary acted as if she'd never left the old McDonald's and didn't address the situation at all. She resumed her usual attempts at small talk and disturbing remarks, but I simply ignored everything she said, got my order, and left. I decided not to go to McDonald's for a while, and only had it when a few friends placed orders at their apartments. I didn't know if Mary still worked there, but I wasn't eager to find out. One afternoon, while walking home after getting groceries, someone suddenly bumped into me out of nowhere, and most of my groceries fell. I bent over to pick them up, and the woman who had bumped into me began apologizing as she joined me to pick up the groceries. When I looked up to thank her, I was shocked to see Mary standing in front of me. I remained in silence as
this woman's stalking him.
Was this woman stalking me, or was this just a coincidence? After standing there in silence, Mary finally said, "Well, young man, I'm in a hurry, so sorry about that," and left, acting like she didn't know who I was. I brushed it off again as a coincidence and walked home.
No, 3 times in a row?
As I got home, I realized
bro.
my house keys weren't on me, but I was in a hurry and figured I had probably left without them. So I quickly got my spare key from under the mat, dropped my groceries inside, and left to meet up with my colleagues. My coworkers and I spent a couple of hours getting drunk and playing games on our day off. I left and headed home. But as I opened my door, something about it felt different. That feeling you get when someone else has been in your home was everywhere. But I was wasted, and all I wanted to do was take a shower. So I quickly looked around and headed to the bathroom. Later that night, I was alone in my living room watching HBO when my phone rang. I was curious about who could be calling me so late at night, so I answered with a simple, "Hello?" There wasn't a voice on the other end, but I could hear someone breathing heavily for about a minute before finally hearing a whispery voice say, "Come upstairs." I ended the call immediately, assuming it was some kids playing a prank, but something about it felt off, and despite my efforts, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and how I felt someone was in my home earlier that day. About 3 minutes later, my phone rang again, and it was the same number. I simply ignored it and tried to focus on something else. That's when I heard a noise coming from upstairs. I quickly switched off the TV and decided to listen more closely to make sure I wasn't hearing things. Sure enough, I heard a loud noise from upstairs, followed by another, and soon enough, I could tell they were footsteps, and someone was actually in my home. I quickly grabbed my phone and called the police before heading to the kitchen and grabbing a knife. The house was silent for the next few minutes, so I began to walk up the stairs slowly to make sure there was actually an intruder. As I checked each room one after the other, I began to calm down and question if I heard anything at all. Eventually, there was only one room left to check, and as I opened the door to the guest room, I was filled with a feeling of relief as all I could see was an empty room. And the sense of relief I had just gotten was quickly overcome with fear. As out of the corner of my eye, I could see a figure standing behind the door. Before I could say anything, the person jumped on me, knocking the knife out of my hand and settling on top of me, pinning both my arms under her. In that moment, All I could feel was terror as Mary looked me dead in the eyes before proceeding to grab the knife I had dropped.
Oh, freak, no. She's
Mary
gonna kill
slowly
him.
brought her head closer to me and began to sniff me, like she was taking in deep breaths. My skin began to crawl, and I began to struggle to get free. But there was no use, as Mary was a lot heavier than I was. She eventually stopped sniffing me and proceeded to say, "Oh, I missed you so much, baby. But you've been avoiding me lately. You looked so tasty today. I had to see you. And well, now I have to take a little bite." She smiled and continued, "Now, it'll hurt a little, but I'm sure you don't mind, darling." Mary quickly brought down the knife on my hand, taking my pinky finger clean off. The pain shot through my body, and I couldn't help but let out a piercing scream. Blood began to spill everywhere, and Mary couldn't hold back her laugh as she threw my finger in her mouth and chewed it down until nothing remained. At that point, I had begun to close my eyes as I slowly lost consciousness from the pain. That's when Mary said, "No, baby, don't do that. I was just about to have one of your tastier parts." She then proceeded to hold my eyelids open as she lowered the knife slowly towards my eye. Before I could begin to plead with her, police sirens filled the air, and I was immediately filled with relief. Mary quickly got off me and pointed the knife at me, saying, "No. How did they find out, baby? You didn't call them, did you?" One look at the woman in front of me, and I could tell she was absolutely crazy. She began pacing the room and was visibly worried, so I decided it was better to play into her game than act out, as I already knew how far she was willing to go. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was you waiting for me, so I called them. Just let me go down there and send them away, and I'll be right back." Mary looked at me with what seemed to be relief, and I could tell she truly believed what I had just said. She replied, "All right, honey, be quick now," and lowered the knife, letting me leave. I bolted downstairs with one thing in mind: get as far away from Mary as I could. As I stepped out of the house, I was met by a group of officers. They asked if anyone else was in the house before storming in and exiting with Mary in the next few minutes. Mary was taken away in tears as she screamed at me for betraying her and not keeping my word, confirming to the police that she was completely crazy. In the last few days, I've been informed by the authorities that Mary is wanted in several states for multiple counts of rape, assault, and suspicion of cannibalism. I was lucky enough to be the only one of her victims to survive her ordeal. That encounter still keeps me up at night, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about the first time I met Mary in McDonald's. I hope my story has helped you all realize that we really know nothing about the people who serve us and our families at McDonald's. In my case, I met a crazy serial killer who posed as a happy-go-lucky woman, but in your case, it just might be the devil who hands you your Happy Meal with a smile on their face.
I'm never eating this stuff again.
Hello everyone. We are thrilled that you have been enjoying our videos. Your support means the world to us. If you've liked what you've seen, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. We would love to hear which one of our videos is your favorite. We're on a mission to reach 100,000 members in the SSG family, and with your help, we can achieve that goal. Thank you for being a part of our journey.
Yeah, no problem.
Christmas is usually one of the best holidays of the year. The kids are always happy. There's food, parties, and presents. It's really that time of year when we can leave all our problems behind and concentrate on being happy, even if it's just for a day or two. The story I'm about to tell you was just before Christmas, in those days when we were getting ready for the holidays and it was all happy times. What neither I nor my children expected was that those moments of happiness would be interrupted because we had an appointment with the unknown. Something we didn't understand at the time and still don't today was stalking us. And you know what? It still is. If you don't know what you're up against, how can you defeat it? It all started on a snowy day. During those days, we decided to take a mini vacation and went to my parents' country house. My wife was hesitant to go since we had a lot of work to do when we got back. But the kids were on vacation from school and insisted all year to go, so we indulged them. It was only a few days before Christmas. We had already put up the Christmas tree and decorated our house in town. But the cabin still lacked some Christmas spirit. We brought some decorations to beautify the cabin a bit, but to my surprise, my parents had left us something. A human-sized
Oh,
Santa
heck
Claus.
no. I hate everything
It
about
looked like
that.
an
I
animatronic,
hate
but it
everything
was
about
very
that.
strange. It was too thin. Normally, Santa Clauses are similar to the real Santa, fat with a huge smile. But there was something weird about this one. His look was touching.
Oh, that
He looked like some Santa Claus out of some child's nightmares. I was about to put it away, but my kids saw it at the same time I did, and for some reason, they liked it.
What? These
Kids
are crazy.
really do have the weirdest tastes. Other than that,
Kids
the
are
day
crazy.
continued as normal. We spent the evening watching movies and eating something as a family. The kids seemed very entertained, and my wife and I were very happy about it. Nothing prepared us for what would happen the next day. After spending the night sleeping comfortably, a scream woke my wife and me at the same time. It was the scream of one of our children. As soon as we woke up, we both looked out the window where the scream was coming from. My two children were outside, running through the snow, running away from someone.
What the heck?
When I looked back a little further, I clearly saw their attacker. No, it couldn't be true. It was the Santa Claus animatronics I had put up yesterday. This didn't make any sense. As I watched him run in the direction of my children, I could see him walk very naturally. This was not an animatronic or anything like that.
Part 2.
It moved like a human, but it was so thin. Who could fit into that costume? I told my wife to call the police as soon as possible while I went to get our children and protect them from their attacker. At that point, I didn't care about bundling up or getting a gun. I had to go as soon as possible. As soon as I got out, I did not go in the direction of my children, but towards my attacker, who for some reason was not running, but only walking in the direction of my children. I don't know what this being was or why it was attacking my children, but I knew I had to do something to
Well, you have
stop
to
it.
get a gun, idiot.
With all my strength, I threw myself at him. I still thought that all this must have some explanation. Maybe it was a person disguised as a Santa. Yes, that must be it. That was the only logical explanation. A little confident from the lie I fed myself, I tried to take him down, but that's when despair and desolation took over my whole body. When I was just a few inches away from him, about to knock him down, I was overcome with a horrible feeling of fear and sadness that prevented me from moving forward. Defeated and crying, I fell to the ground, clutching my chest from the pain I felt. This was
what,
not
running?
the pain of a physical attack. It was not the pain of an illness.
He was having a heart attack?
It was the pain one feels when one is very nervous or sad. Santa simply ignored me and kept walking in the direction of my children. Whatever it was, he was aware of what was happening to me. Possibly, in some way, he caused it, since he didn't flinch an inch from my attack, knowing what was going to happen. After a few seconds that felt like hours, I gathered all my strength to get up and follow him. The pain and sadness I felt at that moment was so great that even though it faded as soon as Santa left, it still haunted me. For me, I would have stayed on the ground surrounded by ice crying, but I couldn't afford the luxury. That being was after my children, and I wouldn't let them feel for a second what I felt at that moment, or worse. I got up and ran as fast as I could through the ice. My children and Santa were already far away in the forest, but the sound of their screams guided me on the right path. With every centimeter I ran, I could feel that horrible feeling taking over my body again. The pain in my chest was getting bigger and bigger. I couldn't be far away. The screams became closer than ever until, crying against a tree, I found my two children. In front of them, the strange figure walked slowly in their direction. As soon as I saw this
that's
image,
so
I turned
scary,
to Santa
bro.
Claus. You would think that nothing had changed from the last time I did it and ended up on the ice crying, but for me, everything had changed. This time, I was watching as the strange being was about to attack my children, and at that moment, I didn't care about anything but protecting them. I ignored the pain, the fear, the sadness, the cold. All I could see was this thing approaching my children. With a war cry, I lunged at it and knocked it to the ice. Blinded by rage, I didn't realize what was really going on. I was just hitting an empty Santa Claus doll. All the feeling of fear and desperation had vanished the moment I made contact with them. Now I was doing nothing more than hitting an inanimate object while my children cried beside me. When I realized this, I stepped aside and went to hug my children while Santa stood destroyed next to us. It was all over. Once we got back, I threw all the parts of that Santa Claus in the trash and put a new one once we got home. I'll be honest with you, the new Santa Claus didn't last more than 2 days. Maybe I was still a little paranoid, but I could swear that every once in a while, it felt like it wasn't in the same position I left it in. As if his head or limbs were moving when no one was watching. Also, I couldn't shake this feeling. This feeling of paranoia that when I was near him, I was constantly being watched. For their part, my children didn't talk about it, but I could see in their eyes that they were terrified. At first, my wife thought everything I told her was a joke. But over time, she began to believe us. Although part of her thinks it's a strange collective paranoia. I can't blame her, and I can't blame you if you don't believe me. Not even in my wildest nightmares could I think something like this could happen. But I guess, as a human, there are things we can never understand. And you know what? It's okay. I don't want to understand what happened that day. I just don't want it to happen again. I just want my family to be safe.
W, Dad.
Working at Burger King was an average job for a guy like me. Often the nights were quiet, with only a handful of customers coming in for a quick dinner before closing. But on that particular night, the story I'm about to tell you was anything but ordinary.
Okay, here we go.
I was alone on the night shift, as usual, and the clock read 10 p.m. when it all started. The night was cold and dark, and the rain was pounding on the windows of the restaurant, creating a gloomy atmosphere. I had finished cleaning the tables and was about to close when I saw a lone man standing outside in the pouring rain. He wore a black jacket and a hat that hid half his face.
So creepy.
But something about his posture sent a shiver down my spine. I still couldn't refuse entry to a customer, so I opened the door for him. The man walked in without saying a word, just staring at me with his cold, dark eyes. He ordered a hamburger and a soda, and I prepared his order. The atmosphere in the restaurant was strange, as if silence and tension had taken over the place. As I delivered his food, I tried to make friendly conversation, but the man didn't respond. He just kept staring at me. Something in his gaze made me uneasy, but I decided not to pay much attention to it. The man sat in a corner of the restaurant, alone, silent. I continued with my usual tasks, but I couldn't help but feel watched. A few minutes passed, and I noticed that the man didn't touch his food. He just sat there, looking at me.
So, bro, you're not gonna eat it? Man made you
I
food,
felt
you're not gonna eat
uncomfortable,
it?
as if I were in a scene from a horror movie. Finally, I decided to approach him and ask if everything was okay. I walked up to his table and spoke to him. "Is everything all right, sir?" The man looked up, but instead of answering, he smiled in a disturbing way. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and his teeth looked sharp
creepy,
as knives.
bro.
At that moment, I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't just let it go. The man finally spoke, and his voice was soft and creepy. "I like your restaurant. It's a good place to be alone." I didn't know what to answer, so I just nodded and walked away from his table. I walked back to the counter, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that came over me. The night was slowly progressing, and the man was still sitting in his corner, not touching his food.
At that point, bro, just get your knife.
I decided to call the manager and tell him what was going on. But the call was mysteriously cut off before I could say a word. I felt like I was trapped in a silent nightmare. I decided to take a break and headed for the bathroom. I needed a moment to regain my composure. While I was in the bathroom, I heard footsteps outside. As I came out, I saw the man walking around the restaurant, looking at everything as if he were inspecting every nook and cranny.
He's a health inspector!
But I knew
That's
I
why he
couldn't
looks
stay
so
hidden in
creepy.
the bathroom
He's
forever.
a health inspector.
When I returned to the counter, the man
chat.
approached and finally broke his silence.
I don't
You
like
have
this
an
music.
interesting place here. I like it. A lot.
Is he the hatchling
His words were
slasher?
unsettling, and his gaze
He's giving
kept
those
boring a
vibes,
hole
bro.
into me. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply said thank you, trying to remain calm. The clock struck midnight, and the man still wouldn't touch his food. At that moment, I realized I couldn't let this continue. I asked him if he needed anything else, if he was satisfied with his dinner. I need you to show me the kitchen. My heart began to pound. I was not allowed to show customers the kitchen, and something about the way he was asking made me even more uneasy. I politely explained that I couldn't do that it was against restaurant policy. But the man was unfazed. He simply got up from his chair and started walking towards the kitchen. I reacted as quickly as I could and started to press the panic button behind the counter, but I didn't know if it was working. The button didn't react and didn't make any sound. Who knows? Maybe it didn't work months ago. Maybe it never worked. Terrified, I made a really bad decision. Driven by pure fear combined with my survival instinct, I ran after him, trying to stop him. I begged him not to come in, but he wouldn't listen. When he reached the kitchen, he stopped and started looking around, as if he was looking for something. I felt trapped between my duty to protect the restaurant and the fear that was gripping me. The man walked over to one of the meat cleavers we had in the kitchen and picked it up.
Dude, run.
At that moment, I knew I had to do something. I grabbed a frying pan and prepared to defend myself, even though it was clear I was at a disadvantage. Do you know what silence is, kid? Silence can be scary, right? The man advanced towards me, his blade held high. I prepared to defend myself with the frying pan, but it was useless. Laughing, he pulled the pan out of my hand as if I were a child playing with something dangerous. Like a cornered animal, I fell to the ground crying, accepting my fate, aware that I couldn't do anything to defend myself against this man. In retrospect, I could have tried to run. I could have thrown myself at him. Anything would have been better than just giving up like that. But
Bro
you know,
just accepted his
it really
fate.
is impossible to act logically in that situation. All I could think of was that a few hours earlier I was at home, getting dressed for a boring workday, thinking about what to eat when I get home. Suddenly, it was all over. Now I was condemned to death by a man I didn't know. His motives were totally unknown. I was just simply going to be the victim of a sick man who was going to kill me for fun. As if knowing what I was thinking and how defeated I felt, the man left the knife on the table and began to rub his hands across my neck, enjoying every second in which I couldn't defend myself. At that moment, I realized something even more terrible. The knife was just to scare me more, but he never intended to use it. I mean, he didn't need to. He just wanted to torture me, to make my death last as long as possible. I could see in his face, in his sick and twisted eyes, how he was going to enjoy what he was about to do to me. Slowly, the man put his hands on my neck. I could feel the veins in his hands getting more and more pronounced, while very slowly, his hands applied pressure to my neck. Little by little, I began to lose my breath. The force in his hands was getting stronger and stronger. What would happen first? Would I die of suffocation? Would my neck break? All I could think about was my family, my girlfriend, my pet. What were they doing right now? Could they have imagined that I was about to die? My vision started to get blurrier. I was fainting. But then, suddenly, the sound of police sirens became audible outside. The man stopped and listened. For a moment, the tension in the kitchen vanished. Police lights flashed outside and we heard the officers enter the restaurant. The officers approached the man and detained him. Apparently, the emergency button worked and alerted my boss, who saw on the cameras everything that was going on. The man was arrested and taken out of the restaurant in handcuffs. He didn't say a word as he was led away, but his cold stare and disturbing smile remained etched in my mind. After he was taken away, calm returned to the restaurant. My manager arrived soon after,
I would quit
concerned
so
and
fast.
relieved at the same time. I explained what had happened, and he thanked me for taking steps to protect the place. He assured me that the man would not cause trouble again, but I was no longer interested. I would never set foot in that Burger King again. Although the man was arrested, I never knew who he was or why he'd come to the restaurant that night. The experience left me with a lingering sense of unease and fear. The silence and the look of the psychopathic man stayed with me long after he was taken away. That night of terror at Burger King was an experience I'll never forget. I learned that sometimes evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, and that silence can be more terrifying than any scream. Since then, I never looked at a hamburger the same way again. And I always made sure the doors to my house were locked at night because I couldn't help but feel that sooner or later, that man would come back to my house to finish what he started.
That's a scary thought, bro.
The date was June
Terrifying.
15th, 2014.
Terrifying thought.
My team and I had decided to finally investigate the old asylum that stood alone and abandoned in Williamsburg, Virginia. This particular abandoned asylum had been the talk of the town for many years prior, with multiple stories and myths, the most famous being about students who snuck in and were found days later completely silent and void of themselves. According to the locals, the government followed up by launching an investigation, sending officials to uncover what had happened, but their findings were so grave they decided to sweep the case under the rug, hiding all students, parents, and officials who entered the asylum. The case was eventually buried, and the asylum was completely sealed off as toxic and harmful. The history of the asylum, while it was functioning, was still unknown, and the details of the students who explored it after it was abandoned are also unknown. My name is Jacob Benedict, and these are the details of how my team and I uncovered the terrifying secrets of the Williamsburg Abandoned Asylum. My team consisted of 5 individuals, including me, and at the time, we'd only been paranormal investigators for about 3 years. In these 3 years of working cases and seeing all sorts of things, we had come to the conclusion that despite whatever stories were told, they were just stories, and there really was no such thing as ghosts, creatures, or things that go bump at night. In this particular case, we heard first about it in March 2014, and finally decided to make the trip to the asylum in June. We got to the town late that day, and didn't do much except lodge in our hotel and brief on the case. We were immediately struck by the inconsistencies and the lack of information about the asylum, which set this case apart from anything we had encountered in the past. It piqued our curiosity and fueled our determination to uncover its secrets. The next day, we headed into town and split up into 2 groups, with 3 of my colleagues heading to the library to try to find out more about the history of the asylum, while Jessica, another one of my colleagues, and I went around town asking locals for any information they had. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you mind if we ask you a few questions?" I said as we approached a middle-aged lady in the street. She replied with,
"Yes, sure. But I'm in a hurry and I don't have much time."
"Yeah, no problem. It'll be quick. Can you provide us with any information on your town's old asylum?" I said. The expression on her face changed slightly before responding with,
"Well, I can't tell you much. If it has to do with that asylum, I know just as much as you."
Her response shocked me as I'd assumed a local would have a lot more information than we did. So I said, "Oh, I apologize. I had assumed since you lived here you'd know a lot more than I do."
"Well, I can see how you'd think that, but I'm sorry, I don't know much, and I don't think anyone you speak to would know much either. Ever since I moved here, I've understood that the asylum is something to stay far away from."
She paused for a minute before saying,
"Of course, there are still stories and ideas, but I'll tell you this for goodwill. Nothing good comes from that asylum. It's best you leave it alone."
Despite saying she knew nothing, something about this lady's warning felt real to me. I also noticed she mentioned she moved here, so I decided to ask, "So, before you leave, Do you know if maybe there's anyone who grew up here and maybe knows something that could help us? She looked annoyed but sluggishly replied,
A lot of people grew up in this town, but the only one I can think of to help is Mary. Her family was involved somehow with the asylum, and she doesn't live that far.
After that, the lady kindly gave us directions to Mary's house, and in less than 10 minutes, we were standing at our front door. The house was extremely large and quiet, but it was obviously old, and I could tell just by looking at it that there hadn't been any repairs in years. We knocked, and in about 2 minutes, an elderly lady opened the door slightly.
Can I help you?
She said, standing behind the door. Yes, we're looking for Mary. We wanted to ask a few questions about the abandoned asylum, I replied. The woman remained silent for a while before reluctantly inviting us into the home. The house's interior was just as run down as its exterior, with the paint peeling off and its floors confirming to me that the house was extremely old. Mary showed us a couch and informed us to wait for her here as she went to get what she needed. She returned a few minutes later with a file completely covered in dust and told us everything there was to know about the abandoned asylum was in there. After a while of talking,
So
we
she
discovered
just has a
Mary's
book?
grandfather was head of operations at the asylum while it was running, and he passed away shortly after it was closed. She explained the file was put together by an employee at the asylum during an investigation that eventually resulted in the closing of the asylum. The case was handled quietly, and the family obtained the file after the asylum was closed, keeping it to avoid any scandals or leaks. However, when the kids went missing, the police asked Mary's father for information, and again, the file was used quietly, and the government found its contents too problematic and swept the case under the rug. Mary appeared emotional talking about this. She proceeded to tell us she'd uncovered the contents of the file after her father's passing and had been burdened by the guilt of keeping it all hidden.
I wasn't going to help you at first, but you seem like good people. I think you will do the right thing with that file and bring light to the activities of what went down at that asylum.
Ooh.
Mary seemed to have confused us for a journalist or some sort, so I responded with, Mary, there seems to be a bit of confusion here. While we do find everything you've told us intriguing, we didn't come here to get the scoop on this. We're here because people believe the building's haunted, and there are various myths revolving around the asylum. We'd hoped you'd know a little bit about its history. Thankfully, you did. But we still need to visit the asylum
That
and
woman
find out
looks
what's
so
really going
betrayed
on.
right now.
Maybe there's even some truth behind the myths. Mary's expression had completely changed now, and she looked almost pale as she said,
Whatever you do, do not visit that place. Just take the file and release the truth.
She paused before grabbing Jessica's arm and saying,
That asylum is no place for people like you. The devil lives there now. The devil and all his demons.
Jessica quickly pulled back her arm and got up before saying, Jacob, we should go. I think we have enough. Mary began to frantically look around, saying,
Don't go. Don't go.
That
I got up
woman
and
is
thanked Mary before
terrified,
leaving
bro.
with Jessica and heading to the asylum.
Oh,
Little did I
no,
know,
bro.
that would be the biggest mistake we ever made. I think it was about an hour later, and my entire group was standing at the gates of the asylum. We had met up earlier to discuss what we had all discovered. The group that visited the library didn't find much, but they'd managed to find the blueprints of the asylum. We told them about our discussion with Mary and proceeded to look at the contents of the file together. The file contained all sorts of horrible tests and experiments that were done on the mental patients in the asylum. These experiments only led the patients to slowly lose more of themselves until they were eventually void. As time passed, patients began to die, and the asylum decided to bury the corpses on its grounds.
Hey, this sounds familiar. Where is this?
What
place
really
again?
began to worry the doctor, however, was the living patients who had already been losing themselves suddenly began to have regular conversations with their dead colleagues. They would be heard laughing hysterically and calling the names of the dead in the middle of the night.
Oh, it's so
It didn't take
creepy.
long before the patients who hadn't been involved in the experiments began acting the same way, and eventually, the doctors. It was as if all those in the asylum began slowly losing themselves until they were completely void and could no longer function mentally. As we looked at the old asylum from outside its gates, it became increasingly obvious nothing good would come from walking through its doors. The asylum was a 3-story building, and it covered around 50 hectares of land. The building seemed way older than Mary's home, however, and its exterior had already begun deteriorating, adding to its already eerie look. I continued looking at the building when I suddenly saw a man staring at us from a window
so
upstairs.
Oh,
That's
no.
when I said, "Hey, who the hell is that?" pointing towards the window. Everyone immediately turned their attention to where I was pointing, but shockingly, there was absolutely no one there.
Yes, this looks so
Haha,
familiar.
very funny, Mason said, assuming I was playing a prank on them. I was stunned and concerned because I could have sworn I had seen someone at the window. Everyone played it off as a joke and began walking into the asylum. I followed behind and tried to focus on the task
This
at
is why
hand,
y'all have to
but
call
all
me.
I could really think about was Mary's warning. I stepped
Too
into
late
the
for that now,
asylum.
bro.
I immediately felt the temperature go down drastically. The building was extremely cold, and although I could tell by looking at it that no one had been there in years, it didn't in any sense feel that way. It actually felt like I had walked onto a stage and had 1,000 eyes watching. We continued walking deeper into the asylum, looking for anything that would explain the paranormal stories that surrounded the building. The floors were still stained with blood, and the rooms were filled with chairs and beds with straps for the patients. The group had stayed together exploring the building when suddenly I followed them into a room, and I was alone. At that point, I'd assumed they were playing a prank on me. "Guys, very funny. You've had your laugh, now let's move on and get out of here," I said, expecting a response. Instead, I was met with a deathly silence, and the temperature got even colder. I was completely scared and alone in the room when someone walked past. I immediately walked out to follow the person, but once again, there was no one there. At this
Zyrie
point,
was
I decided
good.
it was better to leave
We're
the
just
asylum and
watching
wait outside for the
horror,
others. I
horror
turned to
animated
leave,
stuff. How you
but I was
doing?
met with the sight of a young woman in a gown
Oh, shoot,
and
no.
rotting flesh standing in front of me. My heart
Not
dropped
much,
at the sight
I'm
of
just
her,
watching
and she was so
horror
close to me
videos,
that I
you
could
know how
feel
it
her
is.
extremely cold breath on my face. The lady only had one eye intact, while the other was being eaten by maggots and releasing a rancid smell. She slowly got closer and began to open her mouth.
Yeah,
I
what's
closed
up?
my eyes and prepared for whatever was about to
Of
happen
course.
when I suddenly heard a scream from
Of
upstairs.
course I remember you, Zyrie.
I opened my eyes to see she was gone, and I immediately ran upstairs to see what had happened. I looked around upstairs for about 10 minutes before eventually finding Jessica sitting alone on the floor with her head in her hands. She
Wait,
appeared to be mumbling some words I couldn't
Jessica's
understand.
bugging right
So
now,
I slowly
bro.
approached her and said, "Hey Jess, are you okay?
Jessica's bugging, bro.
I don't know what's happening, but we need to leave right now. Come on." Jessica slowly
I'm
raised her
good.
head and turned to me.
I'm just not gonna be able to
She
sleep
responded
tonight.
with, "But Jacob, we can't leave. We have to wait for the others so we can all go together." Jessica had messed up her hair in a way that had her face covered, and the room was so dark I could barely make out anything. But a part of me agreed with her, so I sat beside her and we waited.
That's not her.
We had
That's
waited
not
for
her, bro.
almost 30 minutes in the dark and cold
Run.
silence. So I
Dude,
figured
run.
it would have been a better idea to go look for the others instead. Hey, do you
In Kyle's stream, I went to bed because I don't trust myself to talk without getting mad.
remember where you lost the others? Maybe we can go find them and leave.
But I'm not tired,
asked.
so I'm gonna hang with you.
However,
yeah, chill
I
with
didn't
me.
get a response from Jessica.
I appreciate it.
All I got
need the
was
company.
complete silence. I assumed she was probably just stressed out and didn't hear me, so I said, "Jess, we need to
Run.
leave soon." This time, Jessica replied, once again lifting her head slowly to face me as she said, "Don't you get it, though? We can't leave. You have to stay with us now. All of us."
Oh no,
together.
bro. Oh no, bro.
As she faced me,
Oh,
her hair was out of
so-
her face, and my heart dropped as I came to the horrific realization that I hadn't found or been with Jessica at all.
Oh, he has new emotes?
The woman
That's cool.
began to slowly chuckle before bursting out into full laughter. Her laugh felt like needles piercing through my ear, and before I
That's
could
cool,
react,
Jerry.
the room was full of other.
Someone subbed me to Kyle's. Now I have those emotes. I have access to those emotes now. I'm going to make good use of them.
Other patients also partially decomposed. They all joined in with her laughter and began walking towards me. Their stench filled the room.
Yeah, they are
No matter
cute.
where I looked, their faces would appear, some more filled with maggots than others. At this point, I was completely lost and could barely hear my own thoughts. My body soon began to join in on their laughter. I tried vigorously to fight and gather my thoughts, but all my body could do was laugh and laugh and laugh until I realized I had lost myself. Sir, are you all right? I opened my eyes slowly in response to the voice I had just heard.
I know, bro.
A part of me wondered if I was still in.
That's what I'm saying. These people are so stupid. Like, why just stay there? Run. You have legs. Exactly.
The
That
asylum
is
hallucinated.
his fault.
But
for
as I
staying.
regained consciousness, I looked around to see a bunch of paramedics attending to my group and me. The police were also on the scene, questioning Mary, who had placed a call to inform them we were in danger after we visited her home. I stayed conscious for about 2 minutes more before blacking out and waking up 2 days later in Eastern State Hospital, Virginia. Somehow, I had regained total consciousness and was aware of my surroundings.
Exactly, bro. If that was happening to me, I mean, I would run out there so fast. I don't care who I'm with. I'm leaving all of them.
The rest of them, however, weren't so lucky.
What do you mean?
They all appeared to be conscious, but weren't in any way responsive to what happened around them. The police
don't know.
informed me Mary had called them, and by the time they arrived, I was found laughing hysterically right behind the asylum's front door. This would mean I hadn't taken up to 11 steps in the asylum, and everything I'd experienced was all a part of the trance. The rest of my group, however, were found a long time later and had remained unresponsive. It's been 9 years since my experience with the asylum. Jessica and the rest of my group were placed in a different asylum. I have since given up on exploring all things paranormal, and I visit them regularly to remind myself what I experienced was real and not just a bad dream. Therapy has been helping, but I still see the patients in my nightmares. And every day, I wish I had just listened to Mary's warning. I hope my experience has convinced you all that behind every myth, there is some truth. And it is only those who are suicidal that would doubt the existence of the paranormal.
The
Oh,
following
that freaking gave me chicken skin, bro. That freaking jump scare. Oh, and that makes me rethink my whole career being an paranormal assassin, bro. Man, one of those paramedics and just say everyone standing there. Exactly. Chicken skin. Yes. Chicken skin. Oh, chicken skin, bro. But that's where I got it from. That's where I got it from, Zyri. I'm so glad you know who I'm copying. This is not copyright, by the way. We call him Goosebump. No, in this chat we call him Chicken Skin. I'm sorry, Zyri, but you're in the wrong here. Me too. I love special ed. I love Eddie.
story I'm about to tell you may seem unbelievable. I understand that it may pass as just another internet story. I also understand that even though there were witnesses, not everyone believes me, nor do my family
Exactly.
or friends.
You get it. You get it, Zyri.
I admit
You get me, Zyri.
that even though I question if what I experienced is real, but I know it is. It is as real as the marks on my skin will attest.
Yep.
It all happened at my old job. I used to have a massage parlor in my garage, and to tell you the truth, I really liked it. I always enjoyed being a masseuse, and obviously I studied for it. I'm not going to lie to you. Every once in a while, I received some indecent proposal that honestly ruined my day. But luckily, it happened less and less, and once they got to know me, almost all my clients were regulars. Everything was going more than fine.
Oh no, Zyri, it timed you out. Oh no, Zyri, what were you saying? What were you saying, Zyri? I'm curious now. I'm curious. Oh no. It's Streamlabs. No. Oh no. Not Zyri. Oh no.
Until one day, I got a surprise from
Hey, spoiler alert, woman. No one gives. No one gives a about that story. I mean, I kind of do, you know. Just replace stuff. Yeah. Just like she and I with curse words. Yeah, I get it.
From one of the men who always came to me for massages.
Oh,
It was
so
an
you're timed out?
ordinary Tuesday
Thought so.
afternoon. Nothing made that day special. The weather was normal, not too hot nor too cold. Nothing had happened to me the day before, nor did I expect that day to be remarkable in any way. I simply got up, had breakfast, and went to work on a day when my agenda was composed of clients I already knew.
Hopefully, when I get affiliated, I'm gonna have my own emotes. Like I already have them, but I need to be affiliated to use them. You know, and I'm really excited for that. So I can have Chad can have my emotes. The dog, the dogs are out for free. For free?
The first few massages were normal, and I was getting ready for my next client, and that's when the nightmare began.
Uh-oh.
Tim was always a normal man. He was a married man, and he never made any kind of proposition or innuendo to me. Tim had a small build. He was quite short and skinny, but I could tell he went to the gym from time to time. His personality was quite calm. He was a very polite, humble, and shy person.
How's this gonna
Needless
turn
to
out?
say, he also had a pretty low profile.
Yes, really.
I was getting ready to have a quiet session with him, but as soon as
Do you spell... Wait. How do you spell... I do not know. I cannot read that. Autocorrect isn't autocorrecting. It's weird because, like, every time I don't want autocorrect to happen, it happens. But when I do need it, it doesn't happen. It ticks me off.
he walked in the door, I knew something was wrong. Tim was really very nervous. His face was red, and his relaxed posture was all tense. Like he was really nervous about something.
What
I
happened to
greeted
him?
him politely, and he just gave me back a shy and forced smile.
What happened to him?
Something was happening to him.
He drunk?
Hey, Tim. Sorry for the intrusion.
This man is
But
possessed,
are
is he?
you all right?
This man isn't possessed, is he?
Hi, Barbara. Yes, of course. I'm just a little tense.
Oh, I understand. Lie down. I'll do my best to make you better.
Tough week. I'd appreciate it.
Oh, no.
These last few days have been very...
I'm calling
tense.
it chat. I'm calling it chat.
Once Tim lay down, with his shirt off, I covered my mouth so I wouldn't scream from the shock of what I was seeing. His whole body was different. He had marks and cuts all over.
What the heck?
But these were not marks from a fight, and he didn't look like he had been attacked.
No.
The marks were key points of his body. It was like his body had gotten bigger, and his skin couldn't take it. His skin was cut like a t-shirt that he had outgrown at some point. It was all very strange. But you know what? It wasn't the worst of it. What struck me most about his back was his hair. Tim was always a very neat person. He was one of those people
Bro
who
turned
hated
into a
having hair
werewolf,
on his
chat.
body. From facial hair to hair on his back to hair on his legs. The only thing he was naturally accepting of were his eyebrows and the hair on his head. That's why I was so shocked by seeing him the way I saw him. His whole body. His whole body was full of hair. It was as if this man hadn't
Yes, Larry,
shaved for
hair.
years. When was the last time I saw him? Last month? This didn't make any sense. Had he taken any medication that caused him to have an allergic reaction?
No, that's everything except an allergic reaction.
Is there something wrong with my body?
Oh yeah, bro.
What's taking you so long?
werewolf? Yeah, he is.
Oh,
think
I'm
he's a
sorry,
werewolf.
Tim. I was just looking for the cream. I must admit that Tim's comment caught me totally off guard.
Bro, a werewolf
He
now.
would never have
Exactly.
spoken to me like that. Somewhat uncomfortable, I rubbed some cream on his back and started massaging him. Something was wrong with his back, and I don't mean the cuts or the farting. His back was moving on its own.
What the heck?
I thought about telling him to stay still, but quickly realized that would not be possible. All these movements felt involuntary.
Dude's
It was
possessed
as
by
if
a werewolf.
something was happening to his back, as if it was changing.
Well, bro, is he morphing?
No. Not now. Not again.
What do you mean? Oh,
From
no.
1 second to the next, Tim gave a great scream and began
Yeah,
to move
there's
violently.
instant- yeah.
Terrified, I just stepped back and dropped the cream. His body began to change rapidly. His
Oh,
muscles
he's
swelled,
turning into a
and Tim
wolf.
stopped to scratch violently all over his body.
He's a werewolf.
I didn't
Jack.
know how to react. I was alone in my house.
Werewolf.
Should I scream and alert the neighbors? Wouldn't that put me in even more danger? In the middle of everything that was happening,
I don't
Tim
know.
looked at
Oh,
me
no.
with a lot of anger and
Oh, no.
walked slowly towards me, always scratching and with unpredictable and uncomfortable
Yeah,
movements.
part two, Georgie.
Nervously,
You'll scratch too,
I
Georgie.
grabbed a shovel and told him to back off. In response, he just pulled it out with one hand and threw it to the side. With some resistance, he grabbed my neck with his other hand and slowly began to squeeze me. I can't describe to you what I felt
Shoot.
at that moment.
Exactly.
I
That's what I
tried
was
to
saying.
resist.
Sorry, that's what I was saying the last time. If you're going to go out somewhere, at least bring a gun. Or something to protect yourself. That's what I've been saying.
I tried to fight back, but this person was not the same shy man who always came to me for massages. Nothing I did, no struggle or attempt I made to escape seemed to have any effect on him. Make no mistake, I couldn't breathe and I was choking, but I felt that rather than drown, I would surely break my neck. I could feel my life slipping away from me as the man
People,
focused on
that's why,
trying
Zaire.
to kill me.
People are stupid.
And just as it started out of
Kick your-
nowhere,
Use your
it
body weight
ended.
or something. Yeah, kick your legs.
instead
Use
of
your body
continuing
weight.
to squeeze me until I ran out of air or broke my neck, he simply threw me violently against the wall. Tim threw me with such force that it was a
Dang, dude. Was the massage that bad?
miracle I didn't hit my head against the wall because the damage would have been irreversible. Trying to recover from the blow, I looked up
Scratch him,
and
punch
saw
him,
my
kick his legs,
attacker
yes.
more furious than ever. He wasn't even focused on me anymore. He was just running all over the garage, destroying everything in his path, screaming desperately as if he was an animal that had totally lost his mind. As he screamed, I could see Tim's body move on its own, to which the man only reacted by scratching,
got tired.
but with such force that I thought he would pull his skin off. It was easy to see that Tim, while visibly furious, was also in a great
Exactly.
deal
Get
of
up and
pain.
run, dude.
However, none of this made me question what was happening. No matter how much Tim was suffering, I was the victim, and he was the person attacking me. In the midst of his fit of rage, Tim concentrated on smashing the closet, totally ignoring the fact that I was standing next to him.
That's your chance to run.
I took advantage
Run.
of this situation
Yes, yes.
to slowly approach the huge garage door. Once there, I moved it slowly to open it. The door was very hard, and I could only open it a few centimeters, which served
enough,
to
that's
let
enough.
some natural light into the garage.
That's enough. That's enough.
Unfortunately, that light went right into the closet Tim was destroying, which alerted him immediately. Before I could finish opening the door
under,
and escape,
go under,
I felt
go
Tim's
under.
shadow behind me again. As soon as I turned around and faced him once more, he grabbed my face with both hands and without squeezing, gave a huge, terrifying battle cry, with his face almost pressed against mine.
Kiss? That's a kiss?
That was the most terrifying moment I have ever experienced in my life. Even worse than when he had flung me
You
a
had
few
your
minutes
chance.
before.
You had your chance.
His scream felt so loud, so violent, and so imposing that I felt it pierced my whole body, and took away my will to continue trying to escape.
Bro, gonna devour.
After that scream,
Eat up.
I fell to the ground, sitting down, crying with my eyes wide open. Tim was preparing to attack me once more. But at the last moment, salvation came. The garage door kept opening. It wasn't opening by itself. Several people behind it were pushing it. They were my neighbors. They were trying to get me out of the house. At that moment, I realized that even though I had not screamed or warned them that I was in danger, they all knew what I did for a living and that I was always receiving people in my garage. Tim's loud and violent screams and all the noise generated by such destruction alerted my neighbors, and almost all of
This is
them
all
came
your
to
fault
see
now.
what was happening to me. Once they had managed to open the garage door, they dragged me out before the eyes of a Tim who, instead of attacking them, took the opportunity that the door was open to run out of the house in his underwear. All my neighbors came to my rescue and immediately took me to the hospital. I had been saved. I
The
must
neighbors
tell
are the
you,
only smart ones. Yeah.
that was the last day I saw Tim. Or at least I think it was. From that day on, he never showed up or posted anything on social media again. His family never responded to my messages or tried to contact me. I never understood what happened to this man and how he went from having such a calm personality to whatever happened that afternoon. I must admit that in spite of everything, I always think about him and worry about him. Since that day, all the neighbors report seeing some kind of animal running through the neighborhood at night.
Werewolf.
I know this doesn't make sense, but sometimes I wonder, what if that monster is Tim?
I'm telling you, woman, he got possessed by a werewolf. He probably got bitten by a werewolf. Okay, what else is next? What's
My name is
next?
Charles, and for years, I've been the driver of the last bus. My shift starts at midnight and ends at 4 in the morning. Working the night shift has its share of loneliness, of course. But I've never experienced anything quite like what happened one autumn night.
Bro, swerving in those lanes.
For the first few hours of my shift, everything went smoothly. A few passengers got on and off. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning when I arrived at the last stop before turning around and returning to the depot. The stop was located in a dark and desolate part of town, right next to an old cemetery. There were a couple of dim streetlights, but most of the streetlights were out. As usual, no passengers were waiting at the stop. As I waited for the scheduled time before departing,
You look tired.
I turned
yeah.
on the interior
Doing
lights of
that
the
will
bus
make
to
you
check
tired
that
and
everything was in
depressed.
order. I was checking my rearview mirror when I saw a flash
Nah.
of movement in the darkness.
Nah.
I turned to look out the rearview mirror, and to my surprise, saw a man running toward the bus.
Nah, bro.
It was not unusual
That
for
is
people to
crazy.
be late trying to catch the last
Drive.
bus.
Drive.
The way this man was moving
Drive.
struck me as odd.
Drive.
His movements were jerky and erratic, as if he was panicking.
Drive.
When he finally reached the back of the bus, panting and sweating, I could see his face. He was a middle-aged man with a wild, desperate look in his eyes.
Dude.
I decided to
nah.
slow the bus down so that this man wouldn't miss it. I was never really one of those drivers who enjoy passengers missing the bus to go home, especially at times like that. The man got on the bus and sat in the back of the bus.
You just sealed your fate,
His
bro.
disturbing smile never disappeared from his face.
Ew.
I looked through the rearview mirror and noticed that there were no other passengers on the bus at that time. The bus resumed its march, and as we made our way through the empty streets, the man began to hum a haunting song. It was an ominous tune that I did not
Heck nah,
recognize,
man, yeah.
and his voice had an eerie tone that sent chills down my spine. As we moved on, the man continued his strange behavior. He began mumbling incoherent words and laughed
I
disturbingly.
shoot. Yeah, so
I became increasingly uncomfortable and concerned for my safety.
I'm increasingly.
The possibility that I was dealing with a
listening
dangerous
to
person
this.
became increasingly real. Finally, the man stood up and pressed the button indicating that he was getting off.
Yes, please. Get
This
off.
stop was completely deserted as usual. When I opened the door for the man to get off, he
It's your
just
fault, man.
stood there and kept smiling. I asked
What
him
you
to get
do?
off, but he did not respond. Instead, he began to walk slowly toward the front of the bus.
Get a gun.
I felt trapped in my seat,
a knife.
watching with growing anxiety
Or
as the
something,
man
bro.
advanced toward me. His smile widened even more, revealing crooked yellow teeth. I realized I did not know how to deal with this situation, and the thought of confronting him directly.
Zaire. Well, I mean, it is his job. You have to take into account. It is his job to pick up people. He gets paid for that, so he was just doing his job, even though he's being a total doofus and a dummy.
Terrified me. When the man was only a few
Probably
steps
a dead
away
man,
from me,
yeah.
he finally spoke. His voice was an eerie, icy whisper that made me shiver. Do you know who I am, driver? I shook my head, unable to answer. I had no idea who this man was or what he wanted. Don't you remember?
Oh no, don't you
I was
remember?
one of
No.
your passengers many years ago, one night, just like this.
But you wouldn't let me off.
You had fun watching me miss the last bus, didn't you?
Karma.
I had no memory of that incident, but that didn't matter at the time.
Karma.
I was too scared to think clearly. The man moved even closer, his face inches from mine. I could feel his cold, stinking breath on my face.
This is your last stop, driver. Today, it's your turn to stay behind.
Oh no.
Before I could react, the man pushed me back with enormous force. I fell to the ground stunned as he lunged at me. I tried to scream, but his cold, skeletal hand closed over my throat, stifling my words. Looking terrified, I struggled desperately with the man who assaulted me. His eyes, full of fury and madness, were still fixed on mine, as his
Zaire, I was thinking the same thing. I just didn't want to say it. I just didn't want to say it. Kiss? No. Kisses you passionately while he's trying to murder you.
His grip grew tighter and tighter. I felt my life slipping away, and an overwhelming panic overcame me. In a last act of survival, I reached for a small flashlight I kept in my
But like, you're gonna kill someone because they wouldn't let you off? That's dumb.
jacket pocket. I wielded it with all my strength
Distraction.
and hit the man's head with all my might. The impact knocked him back, releasing his hold on my throat. Coughing and gasping, I took the opportunity to pull away from him. As I sat up, I saw the man withering in pain on the ground, holding his head. He looked dazed and confused.
Beam him up.
Without a second thought,
No,
I ran
jump
to
on
the
him, start
driver's
going to
door
town on
and
him.
slammed the safety
Start
door of the
going
bus
to town
shut,
on him.
making sure he couldn't reach me.
Beam
Then frantically, I reached for my cell phone and called 911 for help. The emergency operator's voice calmed my nerves. I explained the situation and the location of the bus. I was promised that the police would be dispatched immediately.
Exactly.
As I waited, I
Get
held
off
the
the
flashlight
bus.
in one hand and the bus steering wheel in the other, watching the man on the ground. The man began to come to his senses, but instead of trying to open the front door or looking for a way out, he just sat there and stared at me. His haunting smile persisted, and it was bigger than ever. He didn't seem to be in pain or show any normal emotion. When the police officers finally arrived, the man was arrested without much resistance. As they handcuffed the man, he continued to whisper incomprehensible words and laugh, which increased my discomfort and fear of him. The officers assured me that an investigation would be conducted and that they would take steps to ensure my safety.
I never want to
After
see this
giving
man
my
again.
statement to the police, I made my way to the bus stop, shaking and shocked by the experience.
Bro, gonna disappear right
I
in
couldn't
front of
recall any similar incidents, but the thought of having left someone behind on a night like that haunted me. Eventually, the authorities discovered that the man suffered from severe mental illness and had been wandering the streets for years. He was not one of my former passengers as
Oh,
he had
okay.
claimed.
So the man was just crazy.
Although that revelation relieved me to some extent, the experience left me deeply scarred.
Yeah, you can't.
From
but he
that
wasn't
day
dead.
on, nights working on the bus became even more
Oh, no
lonely and
wonder,
terrifying
yeah.
for me. Every shadow in the darkness, every haunting laugh reminded me of that autumn night.
Bro's never gonna pick up anyone ever again.
The story became an urban legend in the area. My night bus, known as the Last Bus, gained an infamous reputation. Though I tried to move on, that sinister smile and the man's icy whispers never completely disappeared from my
He's
thoughts,
never gonna drive again.
and my nightlife was changed forever.
Yeah, man, that stuff's sick.
It's undeniable that some people find it easier to find
Okay,
a job
chat,
than
the
others.
last one.
The job market is very
Last
wide
one.
for young university students hungry for success. For me, on the other hand, it's very different. My name is Alfred, and I am 50 years old. But this is not a story about how
After I fell
Oh
asleep,
shoot.
I knew I had just.
Okay, yeah. No, I that was horrible. That was horrible. I am not. No, sorry. I jumped into that way too quickly. Alfredo.
it's undeniable that some people find it easier to find a job than others. The job market is very wide for young university students hungry for success. For me, on the
I pressed something and it went all the way over here.
other hand, it's very different. My name is Alfred,
I was
and I
trying
am
to turn
50
on
years old.
my eye bags.
But this is not a story about how hard it was to find a job. Today, I will tell you how the job I got, with a lot of effort, is almost the last job of my life. Because
what?
of life, I was never able to study or finish school. Looking for a job at my age was really very difficult. But I am the only breadwinner in my family, so I had to do it.
Look at this freaking triangle of a mustache, bro. Yeah, my bags.
Every job I went to, they told me different things. Some would tell
Oh.
me that they would call me after talking to other candidates. But I could see in their eyes that they knew they wouldn't. Others were more direct
Chat, I keep forgetting I have these headphones on, and every time like I hear something loud, I jump. This freaking scares me.
and told me I was too old for any job, even something as simple as a supermarket cashier. I went from failure to failure, but just as I was giving up, I got an opportunity and started working right away. The job was quite simple. I was going to be the caretaker of a soccer field. The team was pretty humble, so the stadium was pretty modest too. I'm used to everyone at work pretending I'm not there, and when they noticed my existence,
Yeah,
it was to
because
ask
you're
me for
old.
things in a bad way or make fun of me. But this place was different.
I mean, yeah,
All
he
the
does
players
look
and
old.
workers at the club were really warm and welcoming. They all made me feel a part of a big family that started with the president
I'm sorry, I just have to. What the heck is that? That looks like my thumb. This man looks like Pinocchio. This man has a freaking obtuse angle for a nose. This man has like a freaking acute angle for one. And what the heck is that?
and ended with me. The people at this job were very nice, and in the beginning, I was very happy. Until I discovered something that changed everything. Although it felt like a warm
For
and
real,
friendly
bro.
place
Yeah,
during
man.
the day, the locker room was pretty old. When no one was in them, they looked abandoned and very scary. To tell you the truth, I didn't feel scared or anything like that. I was a grown-up person, and I wasn't in the mood for superstitions or getting scared just because I was alone. The players told ghost stories
Yeah,
and said
'cause you
that
get
the
scared
field
from
was
being
haunted.
alone. Not me. Right, chat?
They would tell me to be careful at night when I was alone, but I could tell that they were all laughing and not taking
Yeah.
themselves seriously. My first nights guarding the court were pretty quiet.
It's going
I
well.
came close to falling asleep
Too
several
well.
times. I really had nothing to do, but eventually I would get used to it and have a routine prepared, like carrying a book that I would read after cleaning up. I must admit that I heard several noises inside the locker room or in the facilities
That's
in
why you're
general,
old, but get
but
a
none of
job.
them caught my attention. Wherever I go, there will always be noises. If I am scared by each one of them, I would have to dedicate myself to something else. The important thing was that there were no people sneaking into the facility or a rat problem. I was pretty quiet all night and didn't let anything break my peace. Little did I know that this tranquility would give me a false sense of confidence that would endanger my life. That day,
Uh-oh.
my shift was just beginning. I had just finished cleaning the players' locker room and I was leaving to clean a hallway. But I heard a noise that caught my attention. The noise was coming from inside the locker room and it was too loud to ignore. Surely, no animal could have done it. It was like a thump as if someone had tried to destroy a dugout, but there was no one there, as I had just exited through the only entrance to that locker room. Confused, I took out my cell phone and went back into the locker room, recording everything I saw. I didn't realize it at the
bro, you're
time,
in some
but during the
lady.
recording, a terrifying
long black
shadow
right
passed
there.
by the
Oh
wall
my God, I almost
at
got
an
him.
enormous
Bop, bop.
speed. Even though I
Oh,
didn't
I would
see the
start
shadow,
throwing hands,
I
bro.
felt
I
like
would start throwing
something in
hands
the
if
locker
that
room had
happens.
changed in the 3 minutes I had left. It may have been the same locker room visually, but now there was something about it that terrified me. The place felt icy cold, as if a huge, windless, gelid chill had taken over the whole place. Immediately, I got goosebumps. Not because of the
Start
cold,
throwing punches
but
or
because I
whatever
felt
comes
that
out.
I was no longer alone. Before I could react, the battery of my cell phone ran out and it turned off, which made no sense, because until a few minutes ago, I had it at more than 80% charge without seeing anything. But knowing that I was not alone, I ran out of the locker room as fast as I could. But it was not going to be that easy. Halfway through, I ran out of air and fell to the ground. It was a horrible feeling.
Chicken
I couldn't
skin.
breathe
Not
and
yet.
my lungs felt like they were going
Not
to
yet.
burst. I gathered all my strength to get up again. But there was someone in front of me. There was a man, a local soccer player I didn't know.
what the
Why was he
frick is
dressed
that?
as if he was going to play a match?
is nothing.
Confused,
What the
I got up as
frick?
best I could, and at that moment, I realized that something was wrong with this man.
Beat the brakes off that
His skin was whiter than that of a normal person.
Beat the brakes off
It was too pale a white color, unnatural, as if he were dead. His eyes were glassy and his body was full of bruises. The moment our eyes met, the man began to cry, tears of blood running down his face at enormous speed. Whatever this was, it was not human. While still trying to catch my breath,
I'd kill him,
I
yeah.
tried to run
I mean,
past
you
him,
can't kill
but
him,
he
he's already
grabbed me
dead.
by the neck with one hand. As I stood up, the man looked at me with a desperate and sad face and shouted, "You must help me! Who are you? Let me go! Please, you have to help me!
Yeah.
I didn't ask for this. I was desperate. I'm married. I have a 3-year-old son. It can't end like this. Help me!" "Hey man, I have a family too. I don't know who you are, but please don't hurt me. I just want to see my family. You don't understand the things they do to me. I can't go back. I don't want to go back. I just want to have another
He a
chance to
lab
hug my
experiment?
family. I want to see them again.
Did you see
I don't
how
want to
Egan?
do this. I was lost and no one would help me. I beg you, do something."
I mean, how about you get your
Make
hand
no
off my
mistake,
neck first?
I was terrified. Every fiber of my body was screaming that I was in enormous danger. But while he was saying these things to me, while this man was screaming at me and squeezing me with his arm, I felt that there was no
You're
evil in
already
it.
dead.
There was desperation. Suddenly, he let go of me and screamed for help again. But this time, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking behind me. The temperature dropped even lower,
That's
and even
scary.
though the light was on, the room got darker and darker
Oh,
with
no,
each passing
bro.
second. I looked behind me and saw a bunch of shadows going from one place to another, slowly approaching where we were.
Oh no.
They are here! Don't let them take me, please! In a matter of seconds, the shadows surrounded the whole place, and ignoring me, they threw themselves against the terrified man. The shadows began to surround his entire body as he screamed louder and louder in despair. He dropped to
I
the
got
floor
chicken
and began to
skin, too.
spin as if on fire. And in my presence, something invisible began to drag him around the place until I lost sight of him. I could not believe anything I had just seen. My only reaction was to stay on the floor in the fetal position, crying and praying that this was all a nightmare. As soon as I got home, I saw my family surprised that I had arrived early. Without saying a word to them, I hugged them and started crying. After I didn't answer them when they asked me what was wrong,
Nope.
they just hugged me. The next day, I went to present my resignation.
Exactly.
When I told the
F
president
no,
of the club the whole story,
negative.
he was shocked. At first, he thought it was a bad joke perpetuated by the players. But when I told him about the man, he believed me. This man was a soccer player who had been with the club when it was founded. Being a small club, not many people know this, but this man had taken his own life by hanging himself with a rope,
Oh no.
leaving his family alone. The last thing he told me
outta
was
there.
that normally
But
he
you won't
would not
ever
have
get another
believed
job.
me.
Yeah.
But the night before, someone with the voice of the deceased player knocked on his office door asking for help.
Oh no.
But when he went to see, there was no one there. After accepting my resignation, he told me that he only hoped that he was now in a better place and had found peace. I was left thinking with some bitterness that by the looks of those shadows that took him away, I don't think that happened.
This is so.
The 7th of November, 2000.
Yeah. I'm ending it there, chat. Bro killed himself. Yeah, it is his fault. But we don't even know why he killed himself, chat. That is so messed up. Dang, dude. Ah. Well. Oh my gosh, that was terrifying. Well, thank you, chat, for hanging out with me and getting traumatized along with me. And special thank you to Zyrie. Let's give him a round of applause. Yeah. Alright. That stuff messed up. Yeah, it's very messed up. Yeah, I mean you. Thank you for hanging out with me, chat, aka Zyrie. And I hope you have fun. I hope you have as much fun as I did. And I'm gonna see you next time. Remember, keep your head on the swivel. Everyone's an enemy. Stay vigilant. Alright? Rin out.